So, I've been thinking, how is it that our decisions matter if we have no idea of how any decision that we make is going to play out? There's a game show that I really like. It's called Let's Make a Deal. And in Let's Make a Deal, contestants are asked to come down to the front where they are faced with a fateful decision. They must choose between door number 1, door number 2, and door number 3. Now, behind each of these doors are prizes, and these prizes vary widely. I mean, door number 1 could have an all-expense paid trip to Niagara Falls behind it. Door number 2 could have a brand new washing machine. Door number 3 could be anything from an alpaca to a lifetime supply of Chef Boyardee. Now, I am not interested in this video talking about the virtues of an alpaca versus a new washing machine or a lifetime supply of soup, or I guess Chef Boyardee is pasta. But what I am interested in is the anxiety that these contestants feel as they are asked to make these decisions. People get all stressed out, even though there's no way of knowing until after they've made the decision whether or not they've made the right one. The ancients wrote a lot about the anxiety that comes with choosing between possible futures. And one myth in particular comes to mind, and that is the judgment of Paris. Paris is a prince of Troy, and he's out keeping watch over his adopted father's herds in the hills around the city when he meets Hermes, who is the messenger of the gods. And Hermes tells him that he has been chosen to be the judge of a beauty pageant between the goddesses, specifically the goddess Hera, the goddess Athena, and the goddess Aphrodite. And no sooner does the judgment start than the goddesses start to bribe him. Hera, who is the wife of Zeus, says to Paris, "If you pick me, I will make you a great king." And then there's Athena. She says to Paris, "If you pick me, I will make you good at war and very wise," which of course works since she's the goddess of war and wisdom. And Aphrodite, who's the goddess of love and beauty and fertility, she says to Paris, "If you choose me, I will give you the love of the most beautiful woman in the world." And of course, Paris being a hormonal young man, he chooses Aphrodite, which makes me wonder if Athena isn't actually the goddess of wisdom, because in this case, Aphrodite seems to have got the measure of young Paris. There's a problem, though. Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world, is already married. And when Paris runs off with her, her husband and her husband's friends come after him. And this leads to a 10-year-long war. This leads to the Trojan War and the deaths of thousands and the fall of a city. And Aphrodite didn't say anything about a Trojan horse when she made her promise, so it seems there was a lot more behind door number 3 than she was letting on. Now, Paris is not without fault in the story of the Trojan War, but I don't think you can blame him for choosing Aphrodite, since the goddess didn't give him all the information. Now, his situation is similar to that of another prince. I'm thinking of Joash from the Bible. In 2 Kings chapter 13, Joash goes to visit the prophet Elisha, who asks him to perform a prophetic act. He tells him to take the arrows out of his quiver and to hit them on the ground, which Joash does. He's obedient. He takes the arrows out of his quiver and he strikes them upon the ground 3 times. A lot of 3s here. Door number 1, 2, and 3. Hera, Athena, Aphrodite, and the smashing of the arrows 3 times upon the ground. Now, when he does this, the Bible says in verse 19 that the man of God, speaking of Elisha, was wroth with him and said, "Thou shouldst have smitten 5 or 6 times. Then hadst thou smitten Syria till thou hadst consumed it." Now, Syria is one of the enemies of Israel. Oh, and I'm reading from the King James Bible here. "Whereas now thou shalt smite Syria but thrice." Now, I've heard pastors who are speaking on 2 Kings 13 blame Joash for not showing adequate enthusiasm in obeying the prophet's commands. I remember one said, "If it were me, I would smash the arrows to smithereens." And I mean, shoot, good for you, dude, but that's not what the prophet asked for. This raises the question, was Joash as blind as Paris, or did he have information going into his encounter with the prophet that would have informed his decision and allowed him to, I guess, beat the arrows 6 or 7 times on the floor and thereby gain victory over Israel's enemies? And for the answer to that question, I would like to turn to the book of Ecclesiastes, which is supposedly written by the King Solomon, who is supposedly the wisest man to ever live. And he tells his readers in Ecclesiastes 9, chapter 7, I'm still in the King James Version of the Bible, that they should go their way. He says, "Go thy way, eat thy bread with joy, and drink thy wine with a merry heart." He says in verse 8, "Let thy garments be always white," by which I'm assuming he means clean, "and let thy head lack no ointment." And I don't think he's talking about the oil you see on my head, but rather just the general kind of upkeep you have when you're living life to the fullest. He says, "Live joyfully with the wife whom thou lovest all the days of thy life, which is vanity." And then he tells the reader that he should do all these things. He should enjoy life because it is, in verse 9, "thy portion in this life and in thy labor which thou takest under the sun." So he's saying that we should accept the things that happen to us in life, but then how should we accept them? Should we sort of be leaning back in a kind of warm bathwater sort of way, just being like, "Oh, this happened. Okay, cool. Oh, that happened. Yeah, all right, whatever." Solomon says no. In verse 10, he says, "Whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with thy might, for there is no work, nor device, nor knowledge, nor wisdom in the grave whither thou goest." And I like how in the Hebrew he says, "in Sheol," which is the house of the dead. Now, what Solomon is saying here is that we cannot control the outcomes of the decisions that we make, but we can still control how we make those decisions. Now, how hard and how many times Joash smashed the arrows into the ground, that was the thing that was in his control, in his power to do. And he didn't do it with all of his might. Now, Solomon wouldn't be that interested in the outcome of whether or not beating the arrows on the ground 6 times or 9 times or 3 times was the right thing to do, because these sort of things are arbitrary, and, like, prophecy is weird. But he would take issue with him just tapping him on the ground 3 times. Now, I'd like to think that if I were a contestant on Let's Make a Deal, I'd go down to the front. I would look at door number 1, door number 2, door number 3, not knowing anything about what's behind them, and I just pick one at random. And I would say, with as much confidence I can muster, I'd say with all my might, I picked door number 1. And then, no matter what was behind it, be it an all-expense paid trip to Niagara Falls or a lifetime supply of Chef Boyardee or even Oreos, I would enjoy them because such is my portion. Now, this is ideal. I would like to be that confident, and I would like to do everything I do with all my might, but I know that in the future I'm going to be faced with decisions that are going to give me anxiety, that are going to make me stop and sit and twiddle my thumbs as I think, oh, what if I did this, or what if I did that, as I parse through prospective futures about which I know nothing. And I think that this right here is where philosophy comes in, because philosophy helps us think about what we should be thinking about when we can't help but think. This is where you come in, namesake. I want to know what you think about when you can't help but think about the things you have to do, the decisions you have to make. And since you know so much more about philosophy than I do, I would like to hear what the philosophers of yore have had to say about these sort of anxieties. And not just you, Nathaniel, but I would also like to hear from you, the viewer. Please leave a comment in the comment section about how you deal with these sort of anxieties and how you think about possible futures. So, as always, stay interested and keep thinking.